Well, good morning, Cedar Crest. How are you guys doing this morning? Good, awesome. Hey, can we hear it for our band one more time? Because they absolutely killed it this morning. Well, hey, my name's Cody Harmon. I'm one of the life group pastors here at Cedar Crest, and I'm so excited to be up here with you guys this morning. Before we get too deep into anything this morning, I've got a confession that I need to make. I love superhero movies. All right, so I heard a yes over here. Yes, I'm a grown man with a wife and a full-time job, but I'm also a grown man with zero shame because those movies are amazing, right? Like it's something that just started when I was a kid, and I would go see like a Batman movie or something, and then we'd leave the theater, and I'm like, no, Mom, like I might be Batman. Like we've never seen me and Batman in the same room. We're not sure. And 20 years later, it's not a ton different, just to be honest. But I mean, like, who can blame us? Right? I know there's a lot of us in here that probably go see these movies and love them, and they're just so much better than what they used to be, right? Where like back in the day, it was just like we took Lou Ferrigno, threw some green paint on him, and we're like, all right, he's the Hulk, I guess. We're like, no, it's just a big dude with a shirt off and a green wig on. Like, that's not the Hulk. Like, there's so much imagination you have to use. And now it's just like out there, and we've got all these crazy movies. And I think one of the biggest things that has kind of helped push that along is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Or the MCU for short. And so if you don't know what the MCU is, welcome to 2019. And it's basically this universe of movies and this collection of movies that's been going on for the last like 10 years, right? So like this started back when I was in high school, and there's like 23 movies, I think, that are a part of this overarching thing. So all these movies build onto each other, and they're all interconnected somehow, and they're all intertwined, which just doesn't make sense to me. And to this day, the last time I checked, that all 23 of those movies had made $21 billion. That is just, and I can't even start to count that high. Like, that is just insane. And so these movies are a really big deal to people, and they get like emotionally invested in these characters. I mean, I don't, but I mean everybody else does. And so one of the more recent releases that came out was Avengers Endgame. That came out earlier this year. So I don't know if you saw it or not, but Avengers Endgame was basically like an exclamation point on these 20 other movies. That all 20 movies all built up on top of each other, and basically Avengers Endgame was going to be the wrap up. Like, everything led to this one moment, and it was a huge deal. Like, they were sold out for weeks. Me and my wife couldn't even go see it till it had been out for a month. So if you want to know stress, try to not spoil an Avengers movie when it comes out on social media. If you haven't seen it, it's just intense, and people go nuts over this stuff. And so there was a guy that wanted to go see it when it first came out in China. And so he somehow got tickets to be in the very first showing at his local theater. So not only was he one of the first people at this theater to see this movie, or even in that country, but probably the entire world, he's one of the first people to actually get to see this movie. That this 10 years worth of work, these 23 movies, $20 billion, all led up to this one thing, and he was one of the first people to see it. And so I'm sure he got to the theater and got his popcorn and got his slushie and went inside and sat there for the full 3.5 hours that it took to watch this movie. And I'm sure he laughed and cried like the rest of us. And he got out of the movie theater, and then he saw a long line outside of all of these people waiting to get into the second showing of this film at this theater. And something clicks in this guy's brain. And he says, you know what? I'm going to ruin all these people's day. That these people have waited 10 years. They had their tickets for who knows how long. They're outside waiting. The moment, like, they can taste Avengers Endgame. Like, they're excited to see Robert Downey Jr. back out there again doing whatever he's going to do. And they're so excited. And then this guy comes out of the first showing, and he's like, so-and-so dies. And then this happens. And then they do this. And just yelling spoilers to these nice, innocent people just waiting to go in to see this movie. And so they're understandably frustrated, and they're like, dude, what are you, like, I've been waiting so long to see this movie, and you just ruined the whole thing. And so they all get together, and they beat the mess out of this guy. Like, I don't think that he was seriously injured, or I wouldn't be making fun of him like this, but I mean, they sent a message for sure. The picture that I saw, the guy was just sitting on the ground, leaned up against the wall, and I mean, he's just rethinking every decision he's ever made in his entire life. Where, like, he walked out of that movie thinking that he was the Hulk, and before he get to the car, he was the one that got smashed by this crowd of people. Like, it was insane. That was a little comic book joke, but nobody here got it except for me, so that's fine. But these people rallied around this guy, and they just beat the mess out of him because he just ruined this movie for them. And I'm sure nobody in here is that evil to ruin an Avengers movie for a whole group of people. But we probably all know that feeling of like we say something and we're like, oh, I wish I could get that back like right now. That's almost a daily thing for me. Or we might know what it feels like on the other side where we say something to encourage someone and we see their entire mood change and they're drastically different after we speak to them, and we know what that feels like as well. And we get those reactions from people because our words have power. That regardless of how insignificant we think our words might be or the things that we're saying, our words carry a ton of power. And I would argue that our words have more power today than they ever have in history. Like if you think about the 24-hour news cycle or even the social media itself, that we have more access to words. We can throw words out there at a higher rate than ever before. And just even on Twitter, I read that there's 6,000 tweets posted to Twitter every second. And there's that basically, if you keep the math going, that means there's 200 billion tweets every single year posted on this one social networking site. And so that's not even including like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or, God forbid, if you're still on MySpace, that it doesn't combine those things. That's just Twitter. And so we have more access to words. You have more access to ideas that travel further and faster than ever. And I would argue that unlike other goods, where if we have a lot of one particular product and that drives the price down, I would argue that the more words we have, the higher the cost goes, because there's even more opportunities for negativity to either tear people down or more opportunities for positivity to build people up. And so since we have this access to these words, and since we can share things faster and share our ideas just in a split second, and there's a higher cost for our words, I think for all of us in here, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we want to do with our words? What is it that we want our words to accomplish in our lives? And so this summer we've been going through the book of James, and last week our student pastor, Justin Brecken, gave a message about our actions and how our actions actually show what it is that we're putting our faith in. And so this week we're going to be in James chapter 3. And so James takes this to the next step, and he goes from talking about our actions to talking about our words and how our words impact not just us, but all of the people around us. And so if you're following along on your phone or on the Cedar Crest app or anything like that, we're going to be in James chapter 3. All morning. And so just starting off in verses 1 through 2, this is what James says about our words. So he says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways, and anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check." Right, and so James starts off this idea of our words by actually not even talking about our words. He's making the point right here that our words, if we can have perfect speech, that means everything else in our life is perfect and is kept in check. And so James is saying, like, great, you think you've got perfect speech and you're saying the right thing all the time, then this other area of your life should be perfect as well. That our words are all intertwined with our actions and our thoughts and our desires, and all of these things build on top of each other. And so James doesn't start off telling us what we should say. He starts off by telling us that we should be careful of what's happening in us. And so the very first step we have to start with, before we can even get into what the words that we're choosing to say, we need to know what we're allowing to speak into our own lives. That if we don't know what's speaking into us, then we're not going to really know what we're saying. And James is saying, hey, you should be perfect, because the things that we're allowing to speak into us has the opportunity to change the course of our entire lives. Right? So for me, I'm an only child. So I don't have any brothers or sisters, which for me just meant Christmas was awesome. And so I grew up without siblings, and I would always end up in this conversation with especially adults for some reason. I don't know what happens to adults when we get older, and it's like we don't know how to talk to a kid, and we were a kid, so it should be pretty simple. But for some reason, when I was little, I would start talking to either like my parents' friends or just whatever, and people would find out that I'm an only child, and they're like, oh, you're an only child. And I'm like, oh, yeah, like that's, yeah. And they were like, man, I bet you were just such a bad kid. Your parents didn't want any more kids, right? It's like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, I'm 8 years old. Like, why would you say something like that to a child? Like, I had nothing to do with that decision. They didn't loop me in on that and was like, no, I'm good. I'm by myself. I didn't have any part of that. And besides, we all know the truth about that, right? Where, if you take a test and you get a perfect score on the test, you don't retake it. everybody in here that's an older sibling right now is like, hey, wait a minute. Like, I need to call my parents on my way home. But they would say stuff like that to me, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, am I messed up? Like, is there something wrong with me? And my parents were like, man, that was rough. Like, never again. Like, we're not like, and so luckily, my parents' voices were louder than those weirdo, creep adult voices that were speaking into me, and they were like, no, we're fine. And I was like, okay, so I'm not the weird one. They're the weird one. But so I think for all of us in here, we need to take an inventory of what's actually speaking into our lives. Yeah. Like, are we letting the truth speak into our lives, or are we letting a lie speak into us? Because a lot of times it's easy to hear a lie and we latch onto that because we've accepted that as truth, and it ends up tricking our minds. Where I don't know what you walked in here with this morning, but maybe you're letting anxiety speak into your life right now. Maybe your current situation, you don't really know what's happening with it, or you're in the middle of just a mess, and so you're letting anxiety speak into your life over and over again. Or maybe you're letting depression speak into your life, and there's these thoughts of this overwhelming kind of hopelessness, and you're letting that speak to you over and over again. Or maybe you have fear of the future. Maybe there's a big move coming up. You're starting a new job, or this is the time of year where things are starting to kick off and start to turn over, and you've got fear about what is that actually going to look like. Or you've got fear, or you're letting other people's opinions speak into you, and you've taken their opinions and you've accepted that as truth, and you're believing a lie about yourself that you just heard from somebody else. But so James is saying that this is a big deal, that whatever is going into our lives actually has a huge impact on what comes out of our lives. Because the more we listen to lies that we hear about ourselves, the harder it is to hear the truth that God wants to speak over us. And so if we're listening to these lies and those lies are clouding our judgment, it's going to be more difficult to hear the truth that God says about you, that God thinks about you, and that changes the course of our lives. And so James keeps going in his letter, and he doesn't just stop with what's going into our lives or what's speaking into us, but he talks about how what we let speak into our lives actually changes what we say to ourselves. Because we all talk to ourselves, we all speak to ourselves on some level. Maybe it's not like an audible thing, but we're all saying something and all think something about ourselves. And so James says that whatever we're letting speak into us, we're going to end up saying those things to ourselves. And so when we believe lies about ourselves, a lot of times we're going to end up in a place of pain. And when we speak from a place of pain, one of the first people to be hurt by that is ourselves. And so James is trying to warn us against that. And so going on in his letter, starting in verse 6, this is what he says about words having an effect on the course of our lives. He says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. That sounds like on the outset, like James woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, and it's like, dude, that is like heavy. Like that seems excessive. But when we think about it, like I don't think James is very far off about how our words and what we say to ourselves can actually change the course of our entire lives. And we probably all know what that kind of downward spiral feels like. And I know for me, the clearest picture I have of that is whenever I go play golf. I should probably say try to play golf because I wouldn't consider what I do playing golf. But when I go out, I golf about 1.5 times a year, roughly. And so every time I go out, I think it's going to be awesome. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to have fun. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go out and hang out and just hit some golf balls. And if I shoot a 500, who cares? Like, I'm not a pro golfer. And that lasts about 5 seconds. And then I'm like, okay, this should not be this difficult. And if you've ever watched golf on TV, yes, it looks like the most boring thing on the planet. But if you actually try to play golf, it will make you angrier than 1,000 suns. It is the most frustrating game on the face of the earth. Because I'll start off on the first hole, and I'm like, it's going to be fine. I'm just going to have fun, whatever. And then a couple holes later, I'm like, you know, I think if I resell my clubs, I could still get a couple $100 for them. And I'll sell them right now and just let somebody like, hey, finish finish this round. It's paid for. I'm going to go home where I belong because I should not be out here on this golf course. And then a few holes later, I'm like, well, I can't sell my clubs because I've snapped half of them over my thigh. And so now I've got a 3-wood and a pitching wedge, and nobody can use either of those. And then a few holes later, I'm in full existential crisis because I'm like, dude, the ball's not even moving. It's dead silent. It's just sitting there. How can I not hit this ball? How can I have any value on this earth if I can't even hit this ball that's not even going anywhere? And then by the 18th hole, I'm just like, forget it. I throw my clubs in the lake, and then I get in my car, and I go home, and then I never think about golf ever again. Now, before you judge me on either golf or the emotional issues I need to work through before the next time I go play a round of golf, I think we all do this to some extent. Right? Like, how many times do we start off and let a bad moment or a bad thought turn into an entire ruined week? Where we're like, man, this week's no good, but when we trace it back, it was just that one little thought, that one little thing that started, and James is trying to warn us against that. Those thoughts of like, man, I really messed up this project at work, or, man, I really feel like I'm not nailing this parenting thing right now. Or, man, I'm just really not smart enough to pass this class. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And James is warning us about how those little things can downward spiral and snowball until they become a way bigger thing that actually alters the course of our life. Where we go from thinking, man, I really messed up this project at work, and then we're thinking, man, I'm going to come in tomorrow and I'm going to get fired and I don't know what's going to happen. And then we go to, man, I don't have any value. Like, I don't have anything to add to this. Like, what am I supposed to do in this scenario? And so, I mean, just looking at even what James says, he gives us an example of these ships. They're these massive ships that are driven by strong winds, and they're huge, but when you go to steer them, there's just these small rudders underneath the ship that are steering the entire thing. Where there's a place up in the Pacific Northwest called the Columbia Bar. And it's a part of like the most tumultuous water on the planet. There's a space just past it that they nicknamed the graveyard of the Pacific Ocean. Right? And the Pacific Ocean is huge. So for this to be considered the graveyard, I'm just going to never go there, ever. But so there's, because of where it is, there's a lot of trade that happens in ships that have to go back and forth in this area that's really rocky water. It's just that you have to watch the tides, that it's crazy. And so there are these people that steer these ships, that they're able to steer these massive boats and able to do all of these things, and even they can't get through this patch of water. And so what they have to do is they have to call these guys that are the Columbia River Bar pilots. And so these guys get on a helicopter, they fly out to where the ships are just waiting to cross, and they come out of the helicopter onto the ship, steer the ship through the parts of the water that most people can't even get through. The helicopter comes over, picks them up, they get on the helicopter and go back, and then the ship is able to go on. That there are these pilots that are literally specially trained just to get through this little patch of water that no one can get through, but they are specially trained to actually get through that. But you've got this huge ship, you have this highly trained pilot, and all it comes down to is they know how to use those tiny rudders to steer that ship to where it actually needs to go. And so for us, we need to know what's actually going into our lives, what we're allowing to speak into our lives. Because if we've got me trying to pilot that ship, it's not going to go very well. Right? Like if we're letting the wrong things speak into our lives, we're going to start to believe those things. Yeah. And even worse, when we start to believe the wrong things, we start to repeat those things. And that repetition has the opportunity to change the entire course of our lives. Right? But so this is about so much more than just us thinking happy thoughts or trying to be positive or being optimistic. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But for what we're talking about, it's just incomplete. Because this is about you knowing the truth that Jesus thinks about you. Yeah. This isn't just about thinking like, I'm going to get through today, I just want to be positive. This is thinking, no, Jesus says that you have value, that you are loved, and that the cross of Jesus has power because it proves that Jesus loves you so much that he was willing to die for you to know the truth about yourself. The truth that you were perfectly loved, that you were completely loved, that Jesus actually sends the right pilot down, that he gives us his spirit to help us navigate our life, to help us steer with our words and go where he has actually called us to go and make an impact, not only in our lives, but in the lives of all the people around us. Yeah. Because on the flip side, when we start to believe the right things about ourselves, we start to believe those things too. And when we start to believe the right things, we start to repeat those things, and then that repetition has the opportunity to change the course of our entire lives. But we can't do any of that without hearing the truth that Jesus wants to speak over us and wants to speak into our lives. And so James keeps going with this idea. And so he's talked about what we're believing about ourselves and what we're allowing to speak into us. And how depending on what that is, that has the chance to change what it is that we're saying to ourselves and what we're repeating to ourselves and letting that go. And then he goes into how both of those things build on each other, and both of those together impact the words that we say to other people. And so he keeps talking about the impact our words have on others. And so jumping down to verse 9 in James chapter 3, he says this. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Right, and so James hits us right between the eyes with this. Because this makes sense. Like what he's saying to us logically is like, well, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. But how often do we fall into that trap? Where on Sunday morning, we're in here and we worship God and we're praising God and we're all for it. And then Sunday afternoon, we curse our waitress because our order was wrong. Or how often do we, Monday morning, we're fired up, ready for the week, we're listening to worship music on the way to work, or we're listening to a message or whatever that is, and then by Thursday, we're just in a bad place, and we're speaking to our coworkers from a place of hurt, and we're hurting our family with our words, and we're doing exactly what James is warning us what we're capable of. Because I think when we believe lies about ourselves, it's going to be easier for us to believe lies about other people. And so our words impact that of what we're taking in, and what we're saying to us impacts how we can speak to others and what we're going to say to other people. Right, and so my wife is way smarter and way wiser than I am, so I'm stealing this next illustration from her. But we were talking about this kind of topic a while back, and she said that she kind of had this picture. She felt like God gave her this picture of what it looks like for us to communicate with other people. And she was like, what if when we're talking to others and we're communicating with others that we imagined a plant on top of their head? So whenever we spoke to them, to use James's words, if we speak salt water over them, or we're using salt water, that their plant starts to die and starts to wither up because our words are having that effect on them, and it loses the greenness, it starts to die, it starts to shrivel up, and we can see that dying because of the salt water that we're pouring on that. But on the flip side, to use James's words, what if we put fresh water on their plant and it starts to grow and starts to bloom, and there's more green, it's starting to blossom, that we can actually see their plant in real time grow and get healthier because of the words that we're speaking to them. Right, and so James is saying that we need fresh water to do that. And so it's easy for us to say, like, man, look, there's plenty of people that I can do this with. There's plenty of people that it's easy to love. I got friends or family or a couple coworkers that there's more people in this category for me than there are people in that category. So as long as that stays balanced the way that it is, then I'm fine. That these people are easy to love, but like that person, like, dude, my neighbor lets his dog go to the bathroom on my yard all the time and doesn't clean it up. He's lucky I haven't hit him yet, much less put fresh water on his plant. He's just difficult to love. Or that person that just cut me off in traffic. Glad I don't have a Cedar Crest sticker on my car, because that would have some choice gestures for them. And so I'm not going to try to water their plant. Right? And so James is saying, hey, guess what? That's great, but I don't care. And so James says that person that's difficult for you to love was created in God's likeness just like you were. So that person is just as much deserving of knowing how much God loves them as you are. And so that's why for us as Christians, there's no room for us at all for any kind of bigotry or judgment or racism or anything like that that puts people in a box, because God is wanting to speak a greater truth over their life than what they've heard from other Christians, from what they've heard from other people that have hurt them, or whatever that looks like, that we have a chance to put fresh water on someone's plant and let that grow and let that encounter with Jesus change their lives. Not because of us, but because Jesus is using that to bring them closer to him. Right, so if there's somebody in your life that's on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum from you, either to the right or to the left, James says, great, pour fresh water on that plant. Right, if there's somebody in your life that's making a lot of negative decisions that you would never make in a million years, and you see how it's affecting them or their family, and you just don't get why they're doing that, James says, great, put fresh water on that plant. But are there somebody in your life that looks different than you or has a different background than you, and you just can't seem to see eye to eye on a certain topic or a certain situation? James says, great, water that plant. Because the Apostle John in Scripture says that Christians are going to be known by how well we love each other. That are we these kind of people that say we love Jesus but then throw salt water on people? Or are we these kind of people that we say that we love Jesus and so our lives and our words reflect how we're treating the people around us? That he says Christians are going to be known by our words and by how well we love people, not by how many arguments we've won at the end of the day, not by how many times we've proved that we're right to somebody else, but he says that we're going to be known by our love. And what a waste it would be for somebody to walk away from us feeling unloved by God when nothing could be further from the truth. And so James says that all of these things build up of what we're taking in, of what we're putting out, and that's how people are going to come to know who Jesus is, by the way that we live our lives and by the words that we choose to use for them. And so one of the best ways, I think, for us to see how to do this practically is just looking at how Jesus himself did this with people and how Jesus himself served the people around him. And so we're going to jump to John chapter 5 to close us out this morning. And we're going to start at the beginning of John chapter 5, and basically in this story, Jesus is going to Jerusalem for some festivals. And in Jerusalem, there are these pools there that people would go to for healing. So if someone was blind or paralyzed or whatever, they would go down to these pools, and God would use these pools to stir them up. And if someone was able to get to the pool first, they would find healing in that. And Jesus has an encounter with a guy that's been waiting for a while but isn't able to make it there. So starting at verse 1, we're going to see how this encounter goes with Jesus and this other man. And so John says this, starting at verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. And now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. And so when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Sir, do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked away. So imagine this interaction with this guy, that Jesus doesn't go up to this man and he doesn't tell him like, "Hey, you know what, I was going to heal you, but I saw some stuff that you posted on Facebook that I don't really agree with, and so if you take that down, then I'll come back and heal you." Or Jesus doesn't go up to this guy and say like, "Man, you've just made a lot of really bad choices, and actually if you hadn't made some of those choices, you might not be here in the first place, so if you kind of fix your life and get yourself fixed, then I'll come back and heal you." Jesus just sees this man for who he is, that he was created in God's image, that he is worthy of love, and that he is valued by God. And so Jesus just goes and heals him regardless of what the man can do for Jesus or if the man could even earn it. That Jesus just freely says, "Hey, I see you. I'm going to heal you and give you this new chance at life." Right? Because, I mean, the guy hadn't walked for almost 4 decades. Like 4 decades of not being able to walk under his own power or to get around without help. And he couldn't even make it down to these pools to be healed in the first place. And so can you imagine the plant on this guy's head when the creator of the universe looked him in the eye and said, "No, I believe in you. I'm putting value on your life, that you are worthy of love," just because Jesus said he was, and then healed him in that moment. Or that Jesus comes along and he just puts fresh water all over this guy's life. He gives this guy this new pilot that can steer his ship through those waters, that he gives him this freely just because of who Jesus is. Right? Because see, Jesus didn't go around spending his time proving to other people that he was right. Jesus spent his time going around and proving that other people are loved. That Jesus spent his time proving that no, that not just for this man, but for you in here this morning, that no, you have value, you are loved, that there is something that Jesus wants to speak over you this morning. And I don't know how miracles work. That's a little bit above my pay grade. But what I read in this story is that Jesus didn't go to this man and physically touch his legs or physically do something. That Jesus just spoke a new truth over this man's life. That Jesus spoke a new truth and said, "Hey, I know that for the last 40 years you've thought this and that you've been under this bondage, but right now in this moment, I'm going to speak a new truth and set you free in this place." And the man could actually get up and walk for the first time in 40 years. And so some of you have brought something in here with you this morning that maybe it hasn't been 40 years, maybe it's been 40 days or 40 minutes right before you walked in here. But Jesus says, no, you are loved, you're valued, and Jesus wants to set us free from whatever that is that's holding us back from the love that he wants to give us. And so if you know somebody that needs the prayer this morning, we're going to have a prayer team up front, and they would love to pray over someone that you want to pray for on their behalf, that maybe they're believing a lie about themselves. Maybe they're saying the wrong things to themselves, that they don't understand the truth about who they are. Or maybe that's you. Maybe you are believing a lie about your life right now. You're saying, you're in that downward spiral of saying the wrong things, and you just need somebody to speak truth over you, that we would love to be the ones to help you do that. And so the prayer team's going to be down front, and the band's going to come out and lead us in one more song. So if you would just stand up with us, and we would love to worship some more and offer prayer for you. And but let me pray for us as we close out, and just pray with the fact that Jesus has set us free from any bondage that we might be under because of his love for us. And so, God, we love you. God, we thank you for who you are. God, we thank you that we don't have to stay got stuck in a cycle of lies. God, that you want to speak truth over our lives. God, that you have a truth for us. You have a truth that not only changes our lives, but sets us free to know you even deeper. So Jesus, we are thankful for that this morning. God, we're thankful that we don't have to do anything to earn your love or earn your grace. God, we thank you that you love us regardless of our mistakes or of our brokenness or of our mess. And so, God, we just pray this morning that you would fill this place, God, that you would have your way in us, that you would change our lives for your glory. And so, God, we love you. We thank you. And in your name we pray. Amen.